They thought it'd be funny, send the black girl to scrub a mafia boss's floor. But the joke ended the second his eyes met hers. He didn't laugh. He didn't blink. He just said, "No one touches her." And from that moment, she wasn't a maid, she was a message. They said it was a job. Just a day's cleaning. Easy money. They didn't tell her who owned the barn. Inside, the air was thick with hay, cigar smoke, and the metallic scent of guns. A few men sat at a table playing cards. One looked up, eyes narrowing when he saw her. "Boss," he said quietly, "you're gonna want to see this." She froze when he appeared. The man from every whispered story, every warning spoken in dark corners. Matteo Romano, the Lion of Verona. The man who didn't forgive mistakes. He didn't look angry. That was the scary part. He just stared, slow, unreadable, the way predators study something new before deciding if it's food or a threat. "What's your name?" he asked. Her throat tightened. Tara. The men around him snickered. "They sent her to clean the barn," one muttered, half amused. Matteo's gaze didn't move. "They sent her," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "Interesting." Before we continue, hit the subscribe button if you are joining us and tell me in the comment where you are watching. Your support helps us to bring more thrilling stories to you every day. Tara dropped her eyes to the floor. She felt the weight of his stare like heat on her skin. Every nerve screamed to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She hadn't done anything wrong. She needed the money. That's all. But the way the others looked at her, it was like she wasn't supposed to be here. Like she was part of some cruel joke. She knelt and dipped the mop into the bucket. Her hands shook as she started scrubbing, eyes fixed on the wet floorboards. She could feel them watching. She could hear the low laughter. And then, stop. The room went silent. Matteo had moved closer. She hadn't even heard him stand. "Who sent you here?" I got the job from the agency, sir." "They said." "They lied." His tone was soft, but final. He crouched down, his hand brushing against the mop handle. "Do you know whose place this is?" She swallowed hard. "No, sir." He studied her face for a long moment, then stood. "Leave the mop." She blinked. "Sir." "Leave it," he said again. "Come with me." The men exchanged glances. No one spoke. He walked out, and somehow, without even looking back, he knew she would follow. She trailed him through a narrow hallway, her wet shoes squeaking against the concrete. Every instinct screamed wrong place, wrong people. But curiosity pressed stronger than fear. They stepped into another room. The smell hit her first. Cleaner. Warmer. Books lined the walls, soft light spilling from an old lamp. It looked nothing like the cold barn outside. He gestured to a chair. "Sit." Tara hesitated, then sat. Matteo poured 2 glasses of water, slid one toward her. "You have no idea why you're here, do you?" She shook her head. He smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Good. Then maybe you're innocent in this mess." "Innocent of what?" she whispered. "Someone sent you here," he said, pacing slowly. "They wanted me to see you, to react, to make a mistake." "A mistake." He stopped and looked at her. Killing an innocent girl would be one. Her breath caught. "Why would anyone want that?" "Because," he said, leaning closer, "they know I have rules. And one of them is never touching women or children." He leaned back, studying her again. "So they thought they'd test me. But they sent the wrong girl." Her hands fidgeted on her lap. "I don't understand." He nodded slowly. "You will." A soft knock interrupted them. One of his men entered, eyes nervous. "Boss, they're asking if the girl's leaving." Matteo's expression hardened. "No one touches her. No one looks at her. She's under my protection." The guard blinked. "Sir, you heard me." When the door shut, Tara's voice was barely a whisper. "Why would you protect me?" Matteo looked at her for a long time before answering. "Because," he said quietly, Sometimes fate delivers messages in strange packaging. And you, Miss Tara, are a message. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills. Inside, the Lion of Verona stood by the window, lighting another cigar. And somewhere in the shadows, a rival watched from afar, smiling, knowing his trap had just been triggered. Because what began as a cruel joke was about to turn into the most dangerous obsession Matteo Romano had ever known. And the girl who came to clean his barn would soon have the power to burn his empire to the ground. The rain had stopped, but the silence it left behind was heavier than thunder. The barn stood still, its air thick with sawdust, oil, and the faint echo of what had just happened. Tara, no Jasmine as the agency had listed her, stood frozen by the doorway, her heart still galloping in her chest. The men were gone now. The laughter had died. Only one figure remained, half-shadowed in the glow of a dim bulb. Matteo Romano, the man they called the Lion. He sat on an old barrel like a king on a throne, a cigar between his fingers, smoke curling upward in slow, ghostly ribbons. He didn't speak, didn't move, just watched. Jasmine gripped the mop handle tighter, unsure whether to keep cleaning or run. The clock ticked. The floorboards creaked. And still he said nothing. She decided to work. Each sweep of the mop felt like defiance, a quiet, trembling act of survival. Her shoes squeaked softly on the damp wood, and the rhythm of the motion steadied her hands. She didn't look at him, couldn't, but she felt his eyes trace every move she made. He was testing her. She could feel it. Minutes bled into hours. The light shifted from gold to blue to gray. Dust danced in the beams that filtered through the slats. And all the while, Matteo Romano sat there, silent, patient, unreadable, like a predator with all the time in the world. At one point, she started humming under her breath. A soft tune from home. The melody her mother used to sing while shelling groundnuts in the courtyard, back when life was simpler. It slipped out before she realized it. The sound hung in the air, fragile yet stubborn. A tiny spark of life in a place that reeked of power and death. Matteo tilted his head slightly. His expression didn't change, but his fingers paused midway through flicking the ash from his cigar. He was listening. Before the agency. Before the barn. Before this strange, dangerous man with eyes like storm clouds, there was home. K2. A narrow street lined with broken drains and the smell of frying akara in the mornings. Jasmine's mother, Mama I, sitting on a plastic chair, coughing quietly but smiling anyway. K2. A narrow street lined with broken drains and the smell of frying akara in the mornings. Jasmine's mother, Mama I, sitting on a plastic chair, coughing quietly but smiling anyway. Keep working, she would say whenever Jasmine complained. Work is the one thing they can't take from you. Jasmine had started cleaning when she was 12. Hotels, goose houses, shops, anywhere that paid. She had dreams once. University, fashion design, her own label maybe. But dreams didn't pay hospital bills. So she learned the rhythm of mops and buckets, the sting of bleach on her palms, the way people looked through her like glass. Still, she smiled. Still, she worked. And when her mother's health worsened, Jasmine doubled her shifts. There were days she barely slept, cleaning rooms until dawn, whispering prayers that God would notice. Then one morning, Mama, I didn't wake up. Jasmine didn't cry. Not immediately. She went to work that same day. The hotel manager had frowned. You sure you're okay? I have to work, she'd said. Rent's due next week. That was the day she learned something about herself. Grief couldn't stop her. Pity couldn't break her. And that same grit was the only thing keeping her upright now, in a mafia boss's barn, pretending not to be terrified. The mop stopped moving. Jasmine wrung out the last of the dirty water, her arms aching. Her reflection stared back from the wet floor, small, tired, but unbroken. When she finally looked up, Matteo was still there. Same position. Same cigar. Same impossible calm. Their eyes met for the first time since she'd started cleaning. You done? He asked quietly. Yes, sir. He nodded once. A long silence followed. Then, you came to work, he said. Come back tomorrow. Jasmine blinked. Tomorrow. Same time. She hesitated. But why? He shrugged. Because I said so. And that was it. No explanation. No smile. No threat. He stood, brushed off his coat, and walked toward the door. The sound of his boots echoed softly in the empty barn. Jasmine stood still, processing his words. Of all the things she expected, anger, dismissal, danger, being asked to return wasn't one of them. Come back tomorrow. It echoed in her mind as she gathered her things, her hands still shaking. Outside, the air was cold. Night had fallen, wrapping the estate in silence. She could barely see the main road from here, but she started walking anyway. Her mind spun in circles. Why her? What did he mean by innocent? Why protect her? And most of all, why did part of her want to go back? She didn't have the answers. Only that same stubborn instinct her mother had given her. Keep moving. She reached the gate. A guard stepped aside wordlessly to let her pass. Before she could thank him, he said quietly, "No one gets invited back. Not to him. Whatever you did in there, it got his attention." Jasmine didn't reply. The next morning came faster than expected. She woke up before dawn, heart pounding. She should have refused. Should have walked away, blocked the agency's number, pretended none of it happened. But she didn't. By sunrise, she was on the road again, bucket in one hand, mop in the other, shoes still damp from the day before. The men at the gate recognized her this time. One of them grinned faintly. "You again." She ignored the comment and walked past. The barn looked different in daylight. Less menacing, almost peaceful. Birds perched on the beams, and the smell of hay filled the air. But the tension was still there, humming beneath the surface. Mateo wasn't in the barn yet, so she started working. Sweep, rinse, scrub. There was a rhythm to it now, a kind of meditation. The repetition calmed her nerves. Half an hour later, she heard footsteps. He appeared in the doorway, same coat, same silence. He watched her again, arms folded. For a long while, neither spoke. "You came back," he finally said. "You told me to." A small flicker of amusement crossed his face. "Most people don't listen when I tell them to come back." "I'm not most people," she said quietly. He smiled, just barely. "I'm beginning to see that." The day passed in fragments. At one point, he took a phone call in Italian. Fast, clipped, dangerous. She caught words like problema and tradimento. Problem. Betrayal. His tone didn't rise, but his jaw tightened. When he hung up, he didn't notice she'd stopped sweeping. "You shouldn't listen to conversations that aren't yours," he said, without looking at her. "I didn't mean to," she said quickly. He turned. "Then forget what you heard." "I already have." That earned her a long, curious stare. "You really don't scare easy, do you?" She swallowed. "I'm scared. I just don't let it stop me." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable this time. It was charged. Like respect had quietly entered the room and taken a seat between them. By evening, the barn gleamed. Mateo flicked his cigar into the dirt, studying the shine of the floors. "You work like you're being watched," he said. "I am," she replied. He chuckled softly. "Fair point." As she packed her things, he added, "Be here at 6 tomorrow. Earlier if you can." "Yes, sir." "Call me Mateo," he said. Her eyes widened slightly. "I don't think I should." He tilted his head. "You think too much." And with that, he left, his silhouette fading into the shadows, smoke trailing behind him. That night, Jasmine lay awake in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above her. She could still feel his gaze, still hear the faint rasp of his voice. What started as a cleaning job was becoming something else, something she didn't understand yet. But beneath the fear, something dangerous was growing. Not attraction. Not yet. Recognition. The kind that passes silently between two people who see in each other what the world refuses to see. Endurance, control, and a quiet hunger for more. And so, she went back. Day after day. Each time, his silence spoke louder. Each time, her defiance grew softer, calmer, more certain. By the 5th day, the men had stopped laughing when she walked in. By the 10th, she had learned to read the moods behind his silences, the difference between his thinking look and his warning one. And by the 20th, the unthinkable had happened. The Lion of Verona had started trusting the girl they'd sent as a joke. But in the world Matteo lived in, trust was a dangerous luxury. And the shadows that watched them both were already waiting to take it away. If you've ever kept going even when everyone expected you to quit, hit the like button. This part's for you. By the 3rd morning, the town had found something new to talk about. The Mafia boss hired the black cleaner. It started as a whisper at the bakery, passed along with steaming loaves and early gossip. By noon, it had spread to the diner, the post office, and the barber's shop. By sundown, it had taken on a life of its own, mutating, twisting, gathering venom with every retelling. Some said he was punishing her. Others said he was keeping her. And the cruelest said she was stupid for going back at all. But Jasmine didn't hear the noise. Or maybe she did. She just refused to let it reach her. She showed up again that morning, same worn jeans, same brown work boots, her small frame swallowed by a faded shirt. The guards at the gate didn't bother stopping her this time. They simply nodded. One even handed her a bottle of water without saying a word. The barn looked different now. It was cleaner, brighter. The once-forgotten structure had a strange pulse to it, as if her presence had coaxed life back into its bones. She started with the stalls. The horses stirred when she entered, soft whinnies echoing through the rafters. There was one she'd grown particularly fond of, a black stallion with eyes too knowing for an animal. She named him Mercy, though she never said it out loud. "Morning," she murmured, brushing his mane gently. "You're the only one around here who talks back." Mercy nickered softly, as if in agreement. Headley appeared not long after. He didn't make an entrance. He never did. One moment the barn was empty but for her and the animals. The next, he was there, standing in the doorway, a silhouette against the pale morning light. "Morning," she said quietly, without turning. "You always this early?" he asked, his voice low, gravelly. She smiled faintly. "I'm always this awake." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her move. "Most people can't stand this place for an hour. I've worked in worse. Worse than this." She glanced back at him, the faintest glint of challenge in her eyes. "You ever cleaned a Lagos motel bathroom on a Friday night?" He chuckled under his breath. Barely audible, but there. Point taken. That was the first real smile she'd seen from him. It didn't reach his eyes, but it was something. Their conversations were always short, but they lingered. He'd ask small questions, never too personal at once. "You always this quiet?" She nodded. "Talking doesn't clean the floor." "Where's your family?" "Gone." "How long you been cleaning?" "Feels like forever." The silence between them afterward wasn't awkward. It was steady, a rhythm forming in the background of their unlikely coexistence. Outside the barn, the world wasn't as kind. At the diner on Main Street, the same girls who'd first sent her to the estate now sat in a booth by the window, watching the dirt road that led up to Headley Johnson's property. They sipped coffee and whispered behind manicured nails. "She's still going? Every morning? She must be desperate. I heard he paid her triple. Or maybe she's earning it another way." Laughter bubbled, thin and sharp as glass. They didn't notice the old waitress by the counter shaking her head. "Y'all don't know what work looks like," she muttered, but no one was listening. By the 5th day, the whispers had reached the newspapers. A local tabloid ran a small piece under a blurry photo. "Mystery woman cleaning for crime boss. Love or labor?" Someone had snapped the picture from the hill behind the property. A silhouette of Jasmine bent over a bucket, with Headley's frame barely visible in the shadows. Jasmine saw it that evening on her way back to town, taped on a shop window. Her chest tightened, but she didn't stop walking. Back at the barn, things felt easier. Not safe, not yet, but less heavy. Headley had started showing up earlier, sometimes before she arrived. Once, she caught him spreading hay, his expensive shirt rolled up at the sleeves. "You don't strike me as the working type," she said. He smirked. "You'd be surprised." He walked past her, brushing a bit of dust from her shoulder without thinking. The gesture startled her, a flicker of gentleness in a man whose name carried fear. She pretended not to notice, but her breath hitched anyway. That afternoon, rain began to fall. The roof drummed softly above them, and the scent of wet wood filled the air. Jasmine stood by the window, watching the rain streak across the glass. "You ever think about leaving this town?" Headley asked suddenly. She turned, startled by the question. "Every day." "Then why don't you?" She shrugged. "Because running costs money." He nodded, understanding more than she'd said. "Money I could give you." Her eyes flickered. "I'm not for sale." A slow, quiet respect filled his expression. "Didn't say you were." Their eyes held for a long moment, two storms recognizing each other. Then she turned back to her bucket. "Rain's making the floor muddy again." "Then I'll have to pay you for another day," he said, lighting another cigar. She smiled to herself. "Guess you will." That evening, when she stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet earth and tobacco. Headley followed her to the door. Without a word, he handed her an envelope, plain, thick, sealed. She looked at it, confused. "It's payment," he said simply. "For the week." She hesitated. "This is too much." "It's what your work's worth." Their eyes met again. For a second, she thought she saw something there, a softness that shouldn't belong to a man like him. She wanted to say thank you, but the words stuck in her throat. So she just nodded. He gave a small nod in return, and turned back toward the barn. Outside the gate, the same diner girls were waiting, umbrellas up, faces hungry for gossip. They saw the envelope in her hand, the quiet expression on her face, and they didn't need facts. They had stories ready. "Guess she found herself a sugar daddy," one of them whispered. The others giggled, snapping a photo from afar. Jasmine heard them but didn't look their way. She just kept walking, head high, step steady, heart heavy. Because for the first time in a long time, someone had looked at her work and called it worth something. They could call her whatever they wanted. But she knew the truth. She hadn't gone there for a man. She'd gone there for herself. And somehow, without meaning to, she'd caught the attention of a man the world feared, and the respect of the only person who'd ever looked past what she looked like to see who she was. As the town slept, the photo of Jasmine walking away with the envelope began to circulate online. The caption, "Who was the black girl who tamed the lion?" Headley saw it later that night, his jaw tightening. He should have been angry, but all he felt was something he couldn't name, something dangerously close to pride. And for the first time in years, the man who ruled through fear began to wonder what it meant to protect instead of command. Because the town could laugh all it wanted. They didn't know it yet, but the joke was already on them. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried the weight of a storm. Jasmine was halfway down the gravel path when she heard it, the sharp crack of glass breaking, followed by another. Then silence. Then a low, guttural curse. She turned back toward the barn. The lights inside flickered like restless ghosts. She hesitated at the gate. She'd finished her work, been paid, and could have just kept walking, but something in that sound, that rawness, pulled her back. Inside, the smell of whiskey clung to the air. Headley stood in the middle of the barn, his shirt half undone, his hand bleeding slightly from a shattered bottle. He didn't notice her at first. His chest rose and fell with slow, uneven breaths, and in his eyes, the calm, calculated boss was gone. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally, his voice gravelly and broken. "I was leaving," she replied softly, stepping closer, "until I heard glass breaking." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "Guess I'm making noise now. Not my usual kind of mess." Jasmine said nothing, just bent down to gather the larger shards into a pile with the small broom she always carried. "Don't," he muttered. "You'll cut yourself." "I've cleaned worse than glass," she said simply. He stared at her for a long moment, then turned away, dragging a chair and slumping into it. He poured the last of his drink into a chipped tumbler, his hands trembling slightly. "You ever trust the wrong people, Jasmine?" She didn't answer. He laughed. But it wasn't humor. It was pain. "I built an empire for my family. Did the dirty work, took the bullets, made the money flow. And when the smoke cleared," he paused, his jaw tightening, "they used me, then they left me." The barn creaked around them. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere distant. "They said family never turns their back," he continued, staring into the amber liquid. "But mine did. My brother took over what I built. My mother disowned me. The men I trusted." He broke off, his voice cracking into silence. Jasmine didn't interrupt. She just kept sweeping, letting his words fall heavy into the air. "Finally," she said quietly, "then stop letting them live rent-free in your head." His head snapped up. "What?" She met his eyes, calm, steady, unafraid. "They left. You stayed. You're still here, still breathing, still fighting ghosts that don't pay the rent. Maybe it's time to evict them." For a second, there was only silence. Then a small sound broke it. Soft, unexpected. Headley laughed. A real laugh. It was short, almost startled, but it carried something warm beneath the gravel. Something human. He rubbed a hand over his face. "You've got a mouth on you, Jasmine. Only when people need to hear it. People don't talk to me like that. Maybe that's your problem." He laughed again, shaking his head. "You're either the bravest woman I've met or the dumbest." "Maybe both," she said, smiling faintly. They sat in silence for a while after that, him nursing his glass, her sweeping the last of the broken glass into a dustpan. When she finished, she looked up and said, "You should wrap that hand." He blinked, as if just realizing it was bleeding. "I'll be fine." "No, you won't," she said, walking toward him. Before he could protest, she tore a clean rag from a nearby pile and gently wrapped it around his palm. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched her. Her fingers were careful, her touch deliberate, almost too gentle for the kind of world he lived in. When she tied the knot, she said, "There. Try not to break any more bottles tonight." He looked at the bandage, then at her. "You're different." She shrugged. "You mean poor. I mean honest." Jasmine didn't answer, just gathered her things and started toward the door. As she reached for the handle, he said quietly, "You'll come back tomorrow?" She paused. "You want me to?" His eyes softened, if only for a second. "Yeah, I think I do." She nodded once and stepped into the night. That night, in her small rented room above the corner store, Jasmine counted her pay. Crisp bills, folded neatly, more than she'd seen in months. She separated a few notes and slipped them into an envelope addressed to her mother in Port Harcourt. She wrote a small note on a piece of paper. "Ma, I'm still cleaning. It's honest work. Don't worry about me. Focus on getting stronger." She didn't mention where she was cleaning, or who she worked for. Some truths were too complicated to explain. She sealed the envelope and placed it by the window, whispering, "Tomorrow." The moonlight spilled across the desk, silver and soft. Back at the barn, Headley sat in the dark, staring at his bandaged hand. The barn smelled faintly of soap and wood polish, her scent now. Her humming still echoed faintly in his mind. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, and said to no one in particular, "Rent-free, huh?" Then he laughed again, low and genuine, before taking one last sip from his glass and setting it aside. The next morning, the barn looked different. Not because anything had changed, the same hay, same light leaking through the cracks, but because Jasmine had. Something inside her had shifted since that night Headley laughed. She swept slower now, not out of laziness, but out of peace. For the first time, the silence didn't suffocate her. But the world outside the barn wasn't silent. It was loud, cruelly loud. Word had spread fast, as gossip always does in small towns. The Mafia boss and the black cleaner had become the town's favorite punchline. At the diner, where Jasmine once scrubbed tables for tips, the girls snickered behind menus and fake smiles. Guess she's moving up in life, one of them laughed. Yeah, right into his bed, another added, loud enough for a nearby table to hear. The laughter rolled across the room like smoke. By noon, they decided to take the show on the road. The barn door creaked open, and the scent of cheap perfume cut through the air. Jasmine froze mid-sweep. The girls stood there, lipstick bright, eyes full of venom. Well, look who's hard at work, one sneered. You can stop pretending, Jazz. The joke's over. Jasmine didn't answer. Her hands tightened around the broom. Headley was in the back, fixing a broken stall latch. He turned slowly when he heard their voices. His presence filled the space like thunder before a storm. One of the girls smirked. We sent her here for fun, you know. Thought you'd get a good laugh. You can let her go now. The barn went dead quiet. Even the horses seemed to sense the shift. Headley didn't move right away. He took one long drag from his cigar, exhaled, and looked at them, not with anger at first, but disappointment. A quiet, dangerous kind of disappointment. You think this is funny? His voice was calm, too calm. You think using her is a game? The girls exchanged nervous glances. He stood up. The floorboards groaned under his weight. You think you can humiliate people who work, who show up, who earn their place, just because you can't stand your own reflection? He picked up a rag from the table, heavy with oil and dirt. Clean it yourselves. He threw it at their feet. The sound it made was small, just a dull slap of fabric hitting wood, but the silence that followed was suffocating. The girls' smiles crumbled. One of them tried to speak, but nothing came out. They turned, tripping over their own feet, and rushed out into the sunlight. Jasmine stood there, still holding the broom, her heart pounding. Headley's chest rose and fell slowly. His eyes softened as he looked at her. You shouldn't let people talk to you like that. She swallowed, unsure if she should thank him or just keep quiet. I'm used to it, she said finally. Don't be. For a moment, the world outside didn't exist. Just them, standing in the quiet barn, dust floating in the sunlight, the faint hum of the animals, and something unspoken between them. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was respect. The kind that's earned, not given. That night, as Jasmine walked home, the road glowed silver under the moonlight. The air was cool, and the echo of the town's laughter felt far away now. Her reflection shimmered faintly in a puddle by the roadside. Tired eyes, dirt on her cheek, but something else too, pride. For the first time in a long while, she smiled. Not because someone gave her a reason to, but because she had survived the joke, and rewritten its ending. In the distance, the faint rumble of a car engine faded into the night. She looked back once toward the barn, a single lantern still flickering inside, and whispered to herself, They laughed, but I'm still here. The morning after the laughter died down, a strange quiet settled over the town, the kind that feels heavy, like the air knows something's coming. At the barn, Jasmine was humming again. The same soft tune she always hummed when she wanted to keep her thoughts from spilling out. Headley stood outside by the fence, staring at the horizon. The clouds were low and gray. It smelled like rain, or trouble. He heard them before he saw them. The sound of tires crunching gravel, the low hum of an engine that didn't belong to anyone local. 2 black sedans. Windows tinted. Headley's jaw tightened. His past had a sound, and that was it. The first man to step out wore a tailored coat and an expression carved out of arrogance. The second followed close behind, his hand never straying far from the inside of his jacket. Headley, the first man said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Been a long time. Headley didn't move. Not long enough. The man chuckled. Still got that temper, huh? We missed you in the family. You walked out without saying goodbye. I said goodbye, Headley muttered. You just didn't like how loud it was. The second man's grin faded. You know what this is about. They want you back. Things are changing, and the boss wants the old crew together. Headley shook his head slowly. Tell him I'm out. The man stepped closer, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the mud. You don't get to be out, Headley. Not after what you know. You think you can hide here forever, playing farmer with your little helper. His eyes flicked toward the barn, where Jasmine's shadow moved across the boards. Headley's entire body went still. His voice dropped low, like a growl. Leave her out of this. Then come back, the man said, shrugging. Keep her safe. That's your choice. They left as quietly as they came, but the dust they stirred up lingered, in the air, in his chest, in his thoughts. That night, the rain came hard. Thunder rolled across the hills like distant gunfire. Jasmine was cleaning up when she heard voices. Deep, tense, low. She froze by the stall, broom in hand. The barn doors were cracked just enough for her to see Headley pacing, talking to himself in that voice he used when he was trying not to break something. They won't stop, he said under his breath. They never stop. She stepped closer. Who won't? He turned sharply, startled. Water dripped from his hair, his shirt soaked through. His eyes were darker than she'd ever seen them. You shouldn't be here, he said. Neither should you, she replied softly. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The storm filled the silence. Headley stared at her, something raw flickering in his eyes. Admiration, maybe even fear. Not of her, but for her. Jasmine, he said finally, his voice low and rough. These men, they're not the kind you reason with. If they find out you mean anything to me. I don't, she interrupted quickly. I just clean your barn. But the way she said it made them both know it wasn't true anymore. He turned away, running a hand through his hair. You don't understand. People like me, we don't get to walk away. And anyone standing too close gets burned. She stepped forward, barely a whisper. Then maybe it's not you they should be afraid of. He almost smiled. Almost. Then he caught himself. His expression hardened again, the wall slamming back up. Starting tomorrow, he said coldly, you don't come here anymore. Jasmine blinked, unsure she heard him right. What? I don't need you here, he said flatly. Find work somewhere else. Her chest tightened. This isn't about me. You're trying to protect. It's not your business, he snapped. Just go. The broom slipped from her hand, clattering against the wood. For a moment, she wanted to scream, to demand he tell her what was really going on. But his eyes, the same eyes that once looked at her with quiet respect, now looked like stone. So she did what she'd done all her life when the world turned cold. She nodded. Fine. She walked out into the rain without looking back. Headley stood there for a long time, the sound of her footsteps fading beneath the storm. When he finally sat down, his hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what he'd just done. He told himself it was the right thing, that pushing her away would keep her safe. But deep down, beneath the thunder, beneath the guilt, he knew the truth. He wasn't just protecting Jasmine. He was protecting his heart, from the one person who'd managed to walk into his shadows and not flinch. The barn had gone quiet. Too quiet. Headley noticed the echo of his own footsteps as he moved between the stalls, the smell of hay heavy and oppressive. Jasmine hadn't shown up for work in 3 days, and the absence of her laughter, her chatter, even the soft scrape of her broom, made the place feel hollow. He poured himself another drink, the amber liquid catching the light of the single bulb overhead, and drank it down with a grimace. Each sip was colder than the last, yet it didn't numb the gnawing ache in his chest. He tried to tell himself she would come back. She always came back. But the thought of her gone, facing the world alone, pierced him sharper than any knife he'd ever held. Meanwhile, Jasmine wandered the streets, avoiding the curious eyes and biting whispers of the townspeople. Rumors had spread faster than wildfire, and she could feel the weight of every stare. Sleeping with a criminal, they muttered, though no one had the courage to say it to her face. The mockery followed her home. A shopkeeper sneered as she passed. A group of men lingered at the corner, their laughter carrying long after she had moved on. Each step she took felt heavier, the world pressing down on her shoulders. By the third day, she could no longer bear the tension between what she wanted and what the town expected. Her heart ached not just for herself but for the man she loved. Headley. And yet, She was terrified that showing up might only bring him more pain, more conflict. When she finally returned to the barn, her hands still trembled from the indignities she had endured outside. She had hoped for a word, a glance, a sign that things could go back to the way they were. But the moment she stepped through the door, the tension in the air was palpable. Headley stood with his back rigid, eyes hard, staring at her as if she were an intruder. The broom in her hand felt heavier than any weapon, more a burden than a tool. "Where have you been?" he demanded, his voice low but sharp. She began, but he cut her off. "I don't want to hear it," he snapped, stepping closer. "You can't just disappear like this. Not here. Not with me." His fists clenched at his sides, shaking more with emotion than with anger. "I'm done, Jasmine. Leave. For good." For a moment, she froze, the words echoing in her mind like a bell tolling a funeral. Then, almost reluctantly, she dropped the broom to the floor. The clatter seemed to fill the barn like a thunderclap. She looked up at him, eyes glistening, but her voice was steady, quiet but cutting. "You're not as strong as you think," she said softly. "You're just scared of being seen." The words hit him harder than any punch. His jaw tightened. He opened his mouth to respond, but found no words could capture the storm inside him. She turned, walking toward the door with small, deliberate steps, tears trailing silently down her cheeks. Her shadow stretched long and thin across the hay-strewn floor, disappearing into the dim light outside. Headley's hand went to the barn door, slamming it shut with a force that shook the frame. The echo reverberated through the empty space, and yet, the silence that followed was heavier than any sound he could make. The barn felt like a coffin. He leaned against the door, forehead pressed to the wood, and for the first time, admitted to himself that he could be broken. That without her, he was already falling apart. The smell of hay and whiskey mixed in the air, sharp and suffocating. He poured another drink, but the burn in his throat no longer distracted him. His eyes scanned the shadows of the barn, looking for something, anything, her smile, the curve of her hand, the echo of her laughter. But there was nothing, just the emptiness. And in that emptiness, Headley realized the truth. The fight he had been so ready to wage against the world, the walls he had built to protect himself, they all crumbled in her absence. Fear, not strength, had governed his life. And now, confronted by it, he felt more exposed than ever. The barn stood silent. The light flickered, throwing the shadows into jagged shapes across the walls. Outside, the wind carried away the last traces of her presence, leaving Headley alone with nothing but the ache of loss and the cold realization that some battles, no matter how hard you fight, could not be won alone. The afternoon sun hung low over the town, casting long shadows across the street outside the barn. Headley had thought the silence would last a little longer, but the crunch of gravel under heavy boots shattered it before he even had a chance to brace himself. They were back. Two men from his past, faces cruel and smug, eyes gleaming with the thrill of intimidation. They swaggered toward him, mocking the way he stood alone, the weight of his grief still visible in his posture. "Look at you, Headley," the taller one sneered, spinning a knife lazily in his hand. 3 days without your little maid, and you're crying into your whiskey. Going soft, aren't we?" Headley's jaw tightened. The words burned, but he let them pass, forcing himself to breathe slowly. They circled him like predators, laughter cutting through the warm air. "And where is she?" the shorter one hissed, glancing down the street. "Still scrubbing your floors? Still picking up after your sorry ass?" The insult was aimed at Jasmine, and it landed like a hammer. Headley's head snapped up, eyes blazing. Something inside him snapped along with it. Without warning, he lunged forward, fist connecting with the shorter man's jaw. The man crumpled to the ground, a stunned grunt escaping him. "She's not a maid," Headley spat, voice low and dangerous. "She's the only one in this town with any real guts. Got that?" For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. The other Mafia man froze, calculating, before stepping back with a dangerous sneer. The commotion drew the attention of the townsfolk. Doors creaked open, shutters rattled, and soon a small crowd had gathered, murmuring anxiously, their curiosity overcoming caution. The sheriff, a broad man with a graying mustache and weary eyes, appeared at the edge of the crowd, hand hovering near his holster. Before Headley could speak, a voice cut through the tension. "You can't just—" The crowd parted as Jasmine appeared, her hands still dusty from the barn, eyes wide at the chaos before her. Her chest heaved, not with fear, but with a rush of anger and relief. The Mafia man on the ground groaned, pushing himself up on one elbow. "This little girl thinks she can stand with him," he sneered, voice dripping with contempt. "You'd do better to run, sweetheart, before you get yourself hurt." Jasmine's eyes met Headley's, and for a moment, the world shrank to just the two of them. Then she squared her shoulders, stepping forward, unafraid. "I'm not running," she said. Her voice carried across the street, strong and unwavering. "I never have. And I never will." The taller Mafia man laughed, louder this time, drawing the attention of the crowd. "Seems your little hero isn't so tough either. Who keeps you around, huh? He can't even manage his own woman." Headley's hands clenched into fists, muscles tight. He could feel the heat rising, the old instincts roaring back. The fight wasn't just for himself anymore. It was for her, for everything she had come to mean in his life. Before he could respond, the sheriff stepped forward, arms raised in an attempt to calm the growing storm. "Everyone, step back. Headley, you're under. Wait, what's going on here?" His gaze shifted from the fallen man to the crowd, then to Jasmine, who had remained silent, her expression unreadable. "Sir," the taller Mafia man said smoothly, recovering his stance, "this man's keeping her here against her will. We can all see it. You can either arrest him now or watch the chaos get worse." The accusation hit like a gunshot. Headley's stomach dropped. He opened his mouth to protest, but the words stuck, swallowed by the tension that hung like smoke over the street. The townsfolk murmured again, uneasy, unsure where justice lay. Jasmine stepped forward, her gaze locking with the sheriff's. "I'm here of my own free will," she said, voice steady, carrying over the crowd. "He isn't holding me. Not now, not ever." Headley's heart slammed against his ribs, half relief, half dread. The Mafia men grinned, sensing that the true battle wasn't over. And the sheriff, still uncertain, studied both of them carefully. The street held its breath. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long and jagged. The tension between the law, the townsfolk, and the returning danger was palpable. And in that silence, a single thought throbbed in Headley's mind. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The crowd had grown dense, murmuring like restless waves against the quiet authority of the sheriff. They pressed around the ranch, their curiosity tinged with suspicion, their judgment already formed by whispers, rumors, and fear. Headley stepped out from the barn, boots crunching on the gravel, the sun catching the grit on his sleeves, highlighting the weathered lines of his face. The sheriff, broad and commanding, raised a hand, trying to maintain control. "Headley," he said, voice carrying over the gathering, "you need to release her. Right now. She's under my protection." Headley stopped a few paces from the barn door, meeting the lawman's gaze with calm intensity. His hands were at his sides, steady, and yet every muscle in his body was coiled with unspoken tension. For the first time in days, he felt fully awake, fully present, fully unafraid. "You sent her here as a joke," he said slowly, deliberately, eyes sweeping the crowd, letting the weight of his words land. "You wanted me to laugh. But I don't let go of what's real. And this woman, she's real." A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. Some of them had expected the old Headley, the man who cowered before threats, the man who drank his pain away. But the man standing now radiated something different, grounded, resolute, untouchable in his own sense of right. He turned, slowly, and his eyes softened as they landed on Jasmine. She stood near the edge of the crowd, her posture defensive but her eyes brimming with something stronger, trust, hope, and a quiet defiance that mirrored his own. "You cleaned more than my barn, Jasmine," he said, his voice low, rough with emotion. "You cleaned the dust off my life. Stay, if you want to." For a long moment, she said nothing. The world seemed to shrink to the two of them, the voices of the townsfolk fading into a muted hum. The Mafia men, still on the edges, shifted uneasily, sensing the shift in power but unsure how to respond. Then, slowly, Jasmine nodded. Tears glistened at the corners of her eyes, catching the light of the sinking sun. It was a quiet affirmation, a surrender not to fear, but to the truth that had quietly blossomed between them. The crowd fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing down, a collective breath held in awe. The sheriff, still wary, stepped closer, eyes flicking between them. "You're sure this is voluntary?" he asked. Jasmine lifted her chin, voice steady. "I'm sure. I've never been more sure of anything." Headley exhaled, the tension in his shoulders finally loosening. The barn behind him, once a symbol of humiliation and isolation, now seemed alive, radiant even, its wooden beams golden in the late afternoon light. He felt the burden of the past 3 days fall away, replaced with something lighter, something that could finally be called peace. The Mafia men, defeated not by fists but by the unyielding strength of truth and choice, slunk backward, their bravado gone. They disappeared into the shadows at the edge of town, leaving behind only the memory of fear. A child in the crowd let out a small, delighted laugh, breaking the quiet tension. The townspeople began to murmur again, this time with something closer to admiration than suspicion. Some nodded at Headley as they passed, others gave Jasmine a smile, a subtle acknowledgement of courage. The sheriff, still stern but with a flicker of understanding in his eyes, tipped his hat slightly and stepped back, allowing them their moment. Headley extended his hand toward Jasmine, a simple gesture, and she took it without hesitation. Their fingers intertwined, a bond forged not in grand declarations, but in the quiet, stubborn persistence of trust and respect. "Come on," Headley said, voice softening. "Let's go back inside. The barn's got work to do, our work." Jasmine smiled, brushing a stray tear from her cheek. "And maybe a little more than work," she said. Her eyes sparkled, the kind of light that promised laughter, hope, and something neither of them had dared to name before. They walked together through the crowd, side by side, the murmurs fading behind them. The barn door, once a barrier, now opened to welcome them, golden sunlight spilling across the hay, illuminating every corner of the space that had witnessed both pain and transformation. Inside, the barn smelled of fresh straw and warmth, the air carrying the faint, comforting scent of horses and earth. Headley set down the broom he had been using earlier, the motion symbolic in its simplicity, and Jasmine leaned against the doorway, watching him with a quiet amusement and relief. The barn that had once been a prison of shame was now a sanctuary. Every beam, every plank, every shadowed corner bore witness to what they had endured, and what they had chosen to build together. The echoes of loneliness and fear were replaced with laughter, soft and tentative at first, then bolder, unrestrained. Outside, the sun dipped lower, spilling molten gold through the barn doors. Dust motes shimmered in the light, swirling around them like tiny fragments of magic. The world beyond the walls seemed distant, less threatening, less insistent. Here they had carved out a space that belonged only to them, an unshakable refuge built not of walls, but of trust, courage, and love. Jasmine reached for Headley's hand again, their fingers tightening instinctively, and he returned the gesture. They stepped further into the barn together, each step erasing the last traces of fear, each heartbeat affirming what had already been said without words. They were free, not from the world, but from its attempts to define or diminish them. The barn doors stood wide open, letting the last rays of the sunset pour across the floor. Outside, the crowd had dispersed, leaving behind silence, not the heavy, oppressive silence of before, but a gentle, expectant quiet that seemed to hold the promise of tomorrow. Headley paused in the center of the barn, looking around at the space that had carried their struggle and now their redemption. He exhaled, a long, measured breath that seemed to shake off the ghosts of the past. Jasmine stepped beside him, brushing straw from her skirt, her eyes reflecting the gold light. She smiled, the kind of smile that spoke of endurance, of courage, and of a love that refused to be shaken by fear or judgment. "Ready?" he asked. "For everything," she replied. They walked forward together, the barn doors framing them in the glow of the sunset, a tableau of triumph, healing, and the quiet, unyielding power of truth. The golden light spilled over them, wrapping them in warmth, a promise that whatever storms came next, they would face them side by side. And for the first time in a long while, Headley felt something he hadn't in years. Hope. Real hope.